Welcome to Living Outside the Matrix, the philosophy show where we examine important issues that are either ignored or misrepresented in the mainstream. Hi there, my name's Nigel Howitt, and on the show today we're going to look at a huge potential solution to quite a lot of humanity's problems. And joining me to discuss this is Professor Walter Block, who is an American Austrian school economist. He currently holds the Harold E. Wirth Eminent Scholar Endowed Chair in Economics at the J.A. Butt School of Business at Loyola University, New Orleans. And he's also a senior fellow of the Ludwig von Mises Institute in Alabama. Professor Walter Block, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and a very warm welcome to the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Walter, maybe you could open us up with describing the mixed economy that we have, so we could then go on to sort of talk about a free market in relation to what's going on and the problems that we have at the moment.
Well, we do have a mixed economy in the U.S. I'm more familiar with the U.S. than with the U.K., but I think the U.K. also applies. Corbyn didn't get in which case the U.K. wouldn't have a mixed economy. They would have a socialist economy, but happily Boris Johnson got in. So it's a mixed economy. So what a mixed economy is a lot of free enterprise. You can open up a bakery and sell baked goods. There are problems, like if a gay person wants to buy a cake from you and you don't want to sell a cake to him, there are restrictions. But you can go to McDonald's, you can go to Burger King, you can buy Coca-Cola. Although in in New York City, Mayor Bloomberg won't allow you to drink a 16-ounce of Coca-Cola or some soft drink. So there are accretions, there are limitations, there are regulations, there are very heavy taxes. So it's sort of a combination of economic freedom on the one hand, and then a whole bunch of other programs and limitations and minimum wage laws and rent controls and
health and safety
interferences with free trade. I'm sorry?
Health and safety, perhaps, as well.
Health and safety regulations. The list just goes on and on. Social Security. You're too stupid to save for your old age, so we're going to compel you to save for your old age, and then when you're old, we'll give you money back. And this is a little bit incompatible with why do we let you vote in the first place? I mean, if you're so stupid that you can't save for your old age, why are we letting you vote? And on the other hand, if we let you vote, doesn't that mean that we think you're sensible enough to save for a rainy day or save for your old age? But, it's sort of like a continuum. On the one hand, you have North Korea and Cuba and Venezuela, which is very socialist. But even there, you have a little bit of free enterprise. Even under the Soviet Union, you could own a bicycle, you could own your underwear, things like that. And on the other hand, the freest countries in the world are Hong Kong and Singapore. That is the freest economically speaking. And there you have the least regulation. But you still have regulation there as well. So you could say, well, every country is a mixed economy. That would be true in a sense. Or you could say, look, the Venezuela and North Korea and Cuba are so far over here that we're not calling them mixed economies, we're calling them socialist economies. And on the other hand, Hong Kong and Singapore and, Switzerland and maybe Australia are so free that we'll call them free market economies. And the U.S. and Canada are toward the economic freedom index. One of my books was ranking all the countries in the world on economic freedom. Now, notice we're just talking about economic freedom. In Hong Kong, and no, not Hong Kong, in what's the other one? Singapore. If you chew gum, they'll put you in jail. And they have all sorts of regulations on personal liberties. So we're just talking about economic liberties, which is distinct, I think, from personal liberties. Right. So that would be sort of the ballpark. Most of the economies are mixed economies. And what a mixed economy is, to answer your question more succinctly, is free enterprise, but with a lot of government regulations, virtually all of which are unjustified. Now, there are some government regulations that are justified. Mm-hmm. The law against murder. I favor the law against murder. I favor the law against rape. I favor the law against, I don't know, stealing or something like that. So I wouldn't really call that a regulation or an interference with freedom. I would say that's an enhancement of freedom.
Sure. Well, Walter, maybe I can just interject there just to clarify. So would you say that a socialist economy would equate to a completely controlled economy, with the caveat, as you said, you can own your own underpants and your bicycle, but that's the extreme end of regulation? And does that also mean that you have no property rights to own business by property above and beyond your bicycle? And is that one end of the extreme? And then will we go on to look at this total non-regulation scenario? Is that the other end of the spectrum? Is that what we're looking at?
Well, laissez-faire capitalism would be non-regulation, sort of the society that Murray Rothbard would like, or Ayn Rand would like, or Robert Nozick would like. That would be laissez-faire capitalism. Now, there are two definitions of socialism. There's the technical economic definition of socialism, then there's this other Marxist definition of socialism. So what's the technical definition of socialism? Technical definition of socialism is really what Jeremy Corbyn wanted. Government ownership of the means of production, the mines, the factories, the stores, the forests, pretty much anything that creates goods, the government would own. The government would own the airlines. The government would make all the cars, and that would be the technical definition of socialism against which Ludwig von Mises inveighed in his book Socialism.
Right. Yeah.
And there's this other definition of socialism that makes it sort of complicated, and that is from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Sort of egalitarianism, like Sweden, is a very, very free enterprise country. And most of the Scandinavian countries are very free enterprise, even though Bernie Sanders disagrees, doesn't realize it. But they are welfare states. They take money away from rich people and give it to poor people. And the Democrats, Pocahontas and Bernie Sanders, who are now running here, they want to have a wealth tax. And the problem with the wealth tax is they already paid the income tax with which they accreted their wealth. Now you're going to tax them again because they have wealth. So, but the point is, if this is done on a voluntary basis, then it's okay. For example, the average family, the mother, father, and a little girl of 3 years old. The little girl, 3 years old, eats and has toys, not in accordance with her ability to earn income, but in accordance with her need as determined by parents, or the kibbutz, or the monastery, or the co-op, where people voluntarily share. Well, that's part of free enterprise as far as I can see, even though it adheres to the Marxian notion of socialism. So the key is not so much from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. It's rather, is this done on a voluntary basis, in which case it's kosher, it's okay, or is it done coercively through the government, in which case it's very bad?
There's a big difference there, isn't there, with the non-aggression principle sort of drawing the line. So maybe we can relate the private property rights into it, because we've defined it as a free market as no regulation, and you've distinguished these two sort of your two definitions of socialism. But in terms of property rights, can we bring them into this sort of moral grounding, really, for the fact that you can't go taking somebody else's stuff, I suppose, is the bottom line. But perhaps you can bring property rights into the picture.
Well, property rights are very, very important. I'm a libertarian, and the way I define libertarianism is the non-aggression principle. Keep your mitts to yourself. Don't grab other people or their property. Now, look, you have a very nice purple shirt. You're wearing is it purple? I guess it's purple.
Yeah, it's purple.
Suppose I were to reach across the water and grab that shirt. Did I violate property rights? It all depends upon who is the proper owner of that shirt. If you stole that shirt from me yesterday, I'm now repossessing it. You're the bad guy. I'm the good guy. On the other hand, this is the first time I saw that shirt, and if I grabbed it, I would be a thief. So we have to have a theory of property rights. The non-aggression principle alone is not sufficient, because who knows who owns which property? And we start with, you are a self-owner of that body that's got those headphones and got the purple shirt, and I'm the owner of this body with this shirt, and I'm sitting over here. And we sort of start with that. slavery would be a violation of property rights. Unless it's voluntary slavery, which is a very complicated issue, which we can get into later if you want to. But we start with you own yourself, I own myself. But we need more in order to live than just our bodies. We need land, we need farming, we need manufacturing. So how do you get to own a farm? Well, John Locke, an Englishman, I think we can be proud of him, said that the way you get to own land is through homesteading. You own your labor, your body, you mix your labor with the land, you sort of infuse the land with your body, and now you own the land. There are questions, well, how many years do you have to put in a crop, and how intensively do you have to farm? Do you have to put a corn plant every foot, every square yard, every square acre, every square mile? What? And Murray Rothbard answers that whatever the culture is, whatever the reasonable amount is. Now, I domesticate a cow, and I have milk, and you put in a corn crop, and you have corn, and you own the corn, and I own the milk. But now we trade, and I give you some milk, and you give me some corn, and now I own the corn, even though I didn't produce it, but I can trace it back to homesteading and voluntary trade. And Robert Nozick talks about any illicit interaction, one of which is barter, which we just did. Another is buying and selling. Another is gifts. Another is gambling. You know, I'll bet you a nickel on something, and, you know, we trade property based on the bet. So the libertarian view would be the non-aggression principle and private property rights based on homesteading, and then any way of transferring property that's compatible with the non-aggression principle, such as trade or barter or whatever.
How is it that we don't hear so much about these ideas in the mainstream? I mean, the mainstream is dominated by an almost diametrically opposed set of ideas to the Austrian school and the looking at the benefits of free markets. And we've got this controlled economy. We've got many other characteristics of stimulating demand and all this. Why do you think we don't hear about so many of these good ideas? Why the bad ideas persisted with, do you think, Walter, in the light of the endless examples where they keep failing?
You mentioned Austrian economics. Now, we have to distinguish Austrian economics from libertarianism. Austrian economics is value-free. Austrian economics is a branch of economics. And what all economics says is cause and effect. If you want this, you have to do that. Or if you don't want that, then don't do that. It's a cause and effect relationship, whereas libertarianism is normative. All of economics, including Austrian economics, including Keynesian economics, Marxian economics, whatever it is an attempt to understand and explain reality. It's value-free, it's positive economics. Normative economics, or normative disciplines, or ethics, is very different. It talks about what should be. Like, let's take an example of the minimum wage law. As an Austrian economist, or as a mainstream economist, most mainstream economists would agree with me on this. If you have a minimum wage law of $15 an hour, anyone whose productivity is lower than that, say $6 an hour, is going to have a very hard time finding a job, because if he finds a job, he's going to be paid $15 and he's only producing $6. He's going to impose a loss of $9 on his employer. And if the employer keeps him on the employment rolls and hires more people like that, he's going to go broke. So we can say that minimum wage law creates unemployment for unskilled workers. And that's a positive economic claim. Should we have a minimum wage law? Well, that's a very different question. If we hate unskilled workers and want them to be unemployed, we're misogynists and we hate young unskilled workers, well, yeah, minimum wage is great. Let's have a real high minimum wage, and then we'll have lots of unemployment for people we don't like. It's a perfectly coherent, rational stance. I mean, I think it's vicious and immoral, but from an economic point of view, it makes perfect sense. Look, if we want to have oppression, I'm sorry.
Sorry, as you can say, it's rational and logical, isn't it? In terms of you saying it makes economic sense in this context.
Right, or take I don't know, if you want to kill lots of people, the best way to do it is drop an atom bomb on them. That's a good chemical analysis. Should we be dropping atom bombs on innocent people? Well, that's an ethical question, very different question. So I just wanted to distinguish normative libertarian theory from positive economic theory. And so far, we just, until you mentioned Austrianism, we've just been talking about ethics. Okay, so now that I've mentioned that, let me address the question that you asked. Why is it that not only the newspapers, but also Hollywood, and also academia and the pulpit, why are they all a bunch of pinkos? I wrote a paper on that. I had a hard time getting it published, but we finally got it published. I have 2 co-authors on that. And our analysis is based on sociobiology. So what's sociobiology? Sociobiology is the theory that says we are the way we are right now because of what it took to keep people alive 1 million years ago when we were in the caves or in the trees or wherever we were 1 million years ago. We were half ape or whatever we were. And if you wanted to leave progeny, you had to act in a certain way. And we are descended from people who succeeded in leaving progeny to the next generation. So we're like them. Let me give you a few examples. How many people are afraid of snakes and how many people are afraid of bathtubs right now? Nobody's afraid of a bathtub. It's silly. People are afraid of snakes, and yet bathtubs kill a lot more people nowadays than snakes do. Why is that? Well, because 1 million years ago, you derived no benefit from being afraid of bathtubs. Whereas if you were not afraid of snakes, if you marched up to a snake and patted it, you didn't leave as many children to the next generation as you would otherwise have. We are descended from people who were afraid of snakes. That's why we're afraid of snakes. Yeah. Let me give you another example. Most men, of whatever type we are now, when they see a 22-year-old girl, they say, "Whoop-de-doo, let me at her. She's a sex object. I want to hold her, make love to her, go to bed with her." We see a 65-year-old woman, and we say, not ripe, or, too ripe, or, we're not as enthusiastic sexually about 65-year-old women. Suppose there was this other tribe, just as smart as us, just the same power, the same brain, the same opposable thumb, but they like 65-year-old women, and they saw a 22-year-old girl, and they said, "Oh, not ripe yet, leave her alone." We are descended from people who like 22-year-old girls, whereas the people who like 65-year-old women didn't leave as many children to the next generation as our grandparents did. Okay, so I've given you an example of what sociobiology is. Now to answer your question, why is it that in the pulpit, in Hollywood, in movies, in academia, in the newspapers, and pretty much everywhere you go, they're socialists in the bad sense? Well, namely, they reject the free enterprise system. I teach at Loyola University, and I get freshman students, and I tell them about the minimum wage, and they're appalled. I tell them about price gouging, raising prices when there are shortages, and they think it's callous to raise prices when people, their instincts, their fear of snakes, their fear of economic freedom is palpable. Why is it? Because 1 million years ago, when we were in the caves or in the trees, we didn't have much of a benefit from free enterprise. We lived in groups of 30 or 40 people, all of whom were our cousins or our uncles and aunts and grandparents and grandchildren, and there was no real emphasis on trading. There was an emphasis on sharing. If you caught a deer and you brought the deer back and you didn't share that deer with us, we'd kick you out of the tribe. So there's a big emphasis on benevolence. Like I was in, I'm from New Orleans. Well, I'm from New York originally, but I was in New Orleans during the Katrina problem. And we had flooding, and there was no food, and the prices of food were very, very high, and there was not much food. And you from England you had 2 motivations to come and help us in New Orleans. One was to make money. The other was benevolence. Now, a lot of people had benevolence. People came from all over the world to try to help people in New Orleans. But we want to incorporate both motivations. If you want to help the people in New Orleans, yes, we can rely on benevolence. People are benevolent. People give to charity. Why? Because 1 million years ago, if you didn't give to charity, if you weren't benevolent, they'd kick you out of the tribe, and you wouldn't leave as many children as your cousin would who was benevolent. So benevolence you can rely on. Yes, there's Stalin. Yes, there's Hitler. Yes, there's Tojo. There are bad people, but happily they're a very small proportion of people. Most people are benevolent. If we're now doing an interview, if somebody started coughing next to you or me, and I would give them the Heimlich maneuver, or I'd call the ambulance or something, because we're both benevolent. So we can always rely on benevolence, but you can't rely on appreciation of free enterprise, because a million years ago it was like a bathtub. You didn't get any benefits from appreciating free enterprise. That's why we don't appreciate free enterprise.
You're saying there's an evolutionary component to our behavior in that respect. What about a component due to sort of herd mentality and people just sort of looking sideways, looking up to authorities and absorbing propaganda? Is there an implanted message component as well?
I think so. I think that that sociobiology can also explain that we need a leader or a ruler or something, because in our tribe we only had 30 people, and if we didn't have a leader, and the bear or the lion came to call, or the other tribe came to call, and each of us were fighting in an uncoordinated way, well, we wouldn't do as well as if we had a leader who was a good leader who said, look, you guys go here, you guys go there, we'll trap them this way. So not only do we not have any appreciation of free enterprise, we also have too much of an appreciation of leadership. Now, look, in an orchestra, you need a leader. You need the conductor to, go like this and tell the violins when to play and stuff like that. But economics, free enterprise is very decentralized. We don't need a central planner. Adam Smith, another Englishman, I guess he was from Scotland, we'll still call him an Englishman, wrote a book, The Wealth of Nations. And he asked, why is it that some nations are wealthy and others aren't? And his answer was, well, if you have free enterprise, you'll be wealthy, and if you don't, you won't. That's a very succinct summary of a 1,000-page book, but that's roughly what he said. But a million years ago, we didn't have any big benefit from free enterprise, and we had some benefits from leadership. That's why we have this problem. You see, people who say, well, the reason for socialism is Hollywood and academia and the pulpit and newspapers, but you have to go deeper. You have to say, well, why are they that way? Yeah. Why are little kids taught in grammar school that socialism is great? Well, I think we have to probe deeper. We have to say why it is. Look, that's why I don't know how many people are going to listen to this interview, a couple of hundred, maybe a couple of thousand. If we had free enterprise, it'd be, a couple of billion who would tune in on this. Ron Paul would be the president of the United States if we didn't have sociobiological reasons why he's not president of the United States. And I don't know who the equivalent to Ron Paul would be in England, but he'd be the prime minister. Margaret Thatcher was pretty good, bless her. But, and look, we do have little bits of free enterprise every once in a while, but we don't have as much as I would like and as much as you would like.
So how does this speak into individualism then? Because it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're saying that we have a sort of a tribal history that we're or baggage, you could say, or a predisposition to use our consciousness in a certain way from our ancestors. But do you think as men become more rational, we can, I suppose it's a bit of a wildly philosophical question, but do you think we can is the future as an individual, or is it tribalism? Because we've got this drive towards collectivism that's happening today, and that's very much in step with this socialistic controlled economy. And yet, I think you and I know from elsewhere that individualism is more of a solution. So where are we going with these two things colliding?
Well, I think you and I are mutants. We are biological mutants. Now, I didn't start out as a free enterpriser, but I'm a mutant in the sense that I was open to it. I read the books of Ayn Rand and I was converted, Henry Hazlitt, Ludwig von Mises, Murray Rothbard, I was converted. A lot of people read that stuff and say this is fascism. And a lot of very intelligent people read that stuff. So I don't think it's rationality. There are some very, very smart people. Einstein, I don't know for sure. Everyone tells me he was very smart in physics. I accept that. He was a socialist. He was a very unsophisticated socialist. So I don't think it's a matter of rationality. I think it's a matter of biology. Look, we have to account for the fact why the Libertarian Party gets 1% of the vote in the U.S. Why there isn't even a Libertarian Party in the U.K., I don't think. Why? Well, my answer is biology. Look, I'm a social scientist. This is not normative economics. This is positive economics. I'm trying to explain and understand why it is that there are so few of us.
Over here in the UK, again, I can't speak for the States, there is colossal suppression of, for example, Austrian economic ideas, free markets. Nobody knows what capitalism is. They all think it's something evil and greedy and corrupt, when in fact it's a principle that benefits them without them even knowing it. It's tragic to see people sort of trying to cut off the branch they're standing on in their own ignorance. But over here, there's a huge silence about ideas that can demonstrably work, economic ideas, the free market, and there's huge propaganda towards more and more taxation and more regulation, and we can't even get out from under the regulation of Europe, for God's sake. We're leaving them signing a treaty now, so a deal, and it's just there's a hefty atmosphere of propaganda and mainstream information that it's really sacrilegious to step outside of and point in the opposite direction, as it were. And I think this is a huge component over here. I hadn't considered the the perspective you've mentioned coming from our evolutionary past as well. I had been under the impression from looking around here that it seems to be a lot of coercive, disinformation, basically. People are very fearful of a lack of economic regulation, aren't they? You hear a lot of people think, "Oh, we need the government, we need these regulations." So how does a free market work or appease those fears? How can the free market protect people?
If I can repeat your question, well, what do we do in the face of the fact that people revere, to put words in your mouth, revere regulation? Well, the only thing we can do is like what we're now doing. We're having an interview, or we write a book, or we read Ludwig von Mises and Murray Rothbard, or we teach. I teach in a university, and I try to explain to my students why the free enterprise system is viable and benevolent. As you said, it was a beautiful thing. Why are people cutting off the branch that they're standing on? Well, the answer to that is because of biology. But now what to do about it? Well, what to do about it? All we can do, there are only two things to do. One is to pick up a gun and shoot people, which I think is a very bad idea. The other is education. So I devote my life, and I think you devote a good portion of your life, to educating people about free enterprise. And we have to realize that we're like pushing the rock of Sisyphus. Some Greek guy was pushing a rock up a mountain, and they kept coming down. So what we have to worry about is burnout. We have to worry about the fact that I've devoted my whole life to this. I'm 78. I started when I was about 22. Over 50 years, 56 years I've been at it. And have I seen any appreciable progress? Well, a little bit, on the one hand, we have Ron Paul. We didn't have him when I started. We had Ayn Rand. On the other hand, socialism is rampant all over the place. So in a sense, I've not really accomplished anything. If you look at the broad scale, we still have plenty of socialism, just as much socialism now, just as much hatred and fear and revulsion against free enterprise as we had in 1964 when I started. So you might think I should give up. Well, no, I'm not giving up. I'm giving a case for pessimism. Namely, biology is against us. That's the case for pessimism. But I love what I'm doing, and I'm sure you love what you're doing. There's nothing better to do than to promote freedom and promote free enterprise and to try to counteract this hatred and revulsion of most people toward free enterprise, because this is the only hope for mankind is free enterprise and economic freedom. And, I have children, I have grandchildren, I want them to prosper. And the only way to prosper is with free enterprise, so I devote my life to promoting this. And many other people devote their lives to promoting it. So what I say is, even though we're not accomplishing anything, and we have to realize the reason we're not accomplishing anything or much of anything is because of biology, still it's virtuous, it's godly, it's wonderful. It's just the most beautiful thing. It's even more beautiful than Mozart, and I'm a big fan of Mozart. or a baby smile, or I don't know, a prism, or free enterprise is the most glorious, gorgeous thing on the planet. It's godly. I'm not a religious person, but I think we're doing the Lord's work if we promote free enterprise. So I think we should do it, even though we're not succeeding, because we keep trying. What else can we do?
I agree with you, but what about the fact that free enterprise has worked? So, I mean, it's slightly undermining, if you don't mind me just playing around here, undermining your idea that it's biological, because in 18th or 19th century America, we definitely saw free market working in Hong Kong. The history of Hong Kong since the Opium Wars. We've seen the free market work. It's not as though it's a mystery. Free markets. It's not as if we've never seen one. So there are examples where the free market and property rights has managed to overcome perhaps our biological inheritance, and in spite ourselves, we've seemed to have created a really good free and wealth generating system in the past, haven't we?
I think you're right. We have almost controlled experiments. You know what a controlled experiment is? You have a population divided into two, and you put the way they did the Salk vaccine for polio. They had double-blind tests. Namely, some people they gave a placebo, other people they gave the Salk vaccine, and even the doctors didn't know because they wanted to make sure that the Salk vaccine cured polio. We have almost several controlled experiments: East Germany and West Germany, North Korea and South Korea, the same people, the same culture, the same language, the same IQ, the same history, the same everything. And due to an accident of war, they divided into two different systems. North Korea and East Germany went commie, and South Korea and West Germany had mixed economies or a little bit of free enterprise. And look at the difference. You go from outer space and you look at North and South Korea, and there are no lights in North Korea. And the same thing with East and West Germany. People were not trying to get out of West Germany and into East Germany through the Berlin Wall. They were trying to go the other way. We have Venezuela. Venezuela used to be one of the richest countries in South America, and then Maduro and the other guys got in charge. We have numerous cases, and this is our armament. This is what we use. We have minimum wage laws. We know that if you have a high minimum wage, you're going to have more unemployment. We have plenty of intellectual ammunition. But is it working? Is Hollywood convinced? Are academia convinced? Are Bernie Sanders convinced? No.
Would you say that the evidence is conclusive? Would you say that if we just, if everyone in theory could sit around the table and examine the facts and the case histories, the A/B testing of these countries you refer to, but is it a rational case that's conclusive? I'm familiar with a lot of the evidence. Perhaps some listeners aren't. But just your thoughts on that briefly, and then I want to bring you back to what can we say to people who think, oh no, we need regulations, that they're afraid of a free market. What can we say to those people? Do you think in this conversation? How can we appease fear of a free market?
Look, if we sat people down and we shook them by the shoulders and said, look, listen to this, listen to North Korea and South Korea, listen, it doesn't work. It doesn't work because you're dealing with biology. They shut down. They think you're a fascist. They think you're a Nazi. They think it's, what's the word? Offensive. That's the word that's used in academia. If you favor free enterprise, you're offensive. You're hateful. You people, I'm now spewing forth hate speech. This is hateful. What's the matter with you? You must be an evil person to believe in free enterprise. Namely, we're dealing with biology. Now, look, you gave me some counterexamples. I'll give you another counterexample. And we did this in our chapter. The first third of our paper, sociobiological explanation of why we don't have free enterprise, was what I told you. The second third of it was one of my co-authors said, hey, look, we go back 10,000 years ago, not a million years ago, but 10,000 years ago, and we find 3,000 pots. And we know that the tribe was only 50 people. And over there, 3 miles away, we find 3,000 fishing poles. From this, we deduce that they were trading. Just 10,000 years ago, before of history, we look in archaeology, And we deduce from this that people were trading even 10,000 years ago. So this is another counterexample to my thesis. And in the third section of the paper, what we say is, yes, we also do have some elements of free enterprise. Because probably a million years ago, you had a rock and I had a stick, and we traded within the family. And as you mentioned, we had Margaret Thatcher, and in the 1800s in England, it was more free. We do have some vestiges of free enterprise. A little bit, but it's not as deeply embedded. It's only 10,000 years, or it's very small amounts. Whereas you go back not only to human beings, but you go back to not only to mammals, but even to cold-blooded creatures, and you'll find benevolence. You'll find that the mother deer takes care of the baby deer. You'll find that the mother crocodile takes care of her eggs. So what I'm saying is, yes, we do have some vestiges. We do have some little bits of freedom. Even in the Soviet Union, you could own a bicycle or your underwear. You can own your underwear there. So the situation is more complicated. It's not that we don't have any free enterprise. We have little teeny bits of it, but it's overwhelmed by our benevolence. And the market is not benevolent. The market is based on making a profit. And as Adam Smith taught us, the way to help other people is to make a profit. But the biology is so overwhelming for so many people. Look, I have my wife, my daughter, they're a bunch of pinkos. I try to explain this stuff to them, but the screen comes down and they don't listen. I try to explain this to my students, and some of my students get it, but some of my students think I'm hateful. Why? I attribute this to biology. Okay, now let me talk about your second question. How can we tell them about regulation? My favorite thing is on regulation, healthcare. And I know that in England, the socialized medicine is sort of like you can't question socialized medicine. You question socialized medicine, if you question socialized medicine, you favor ill health.
You're a monster.
You're a monster. If you question public education, you're questioning education. If you question pure food and drug, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration in the United States, you're in favor of poisoning people with food and drugs. Look,
the irrationality of the mainstream there, for sure.
I think the way I try to convince people about this is I say, look, we have the Food and Drug Administration. I'm not sure what the equivalent in England is. If you want to have a new drug or a food, you have to get them to approve. Every once in a while, they make a mistake. There was this case of a morning sickness drug that created malformed babies. Did the FDA go broke when they made that mistake? No, they didn't. They didn't go broke. Whereas what we should do, instead of having a licensing bureau, see, a licensing bureau, if you come up with a new food or drug, if they don't approve it, you can't sell it. Much better would be a competitive industry of certification. Namely, if the certification agency approves of something bad, then they go broke. Look, we were talking about your shirt. The reason we have pretty good shirts, pretty good wristwatches, pretty good eyeglasses is because we have competition. If a company makes a good shirt, they prosper and they can make more shirts. If they make bad shirts, they lose money and they have to go broke. The reason we have pretty good shoes and socks and rubber bands and paper clips is because we have competition. So all I say to people who worry about quality of food is, let's have the same system for certifying the quality of food and drugs. Namely, if you do a good job, you prosper. If you do a bad job, you don't. And we already have that. We have good housekeeping seals of approval. We have consumer reports. We have Fitch and Moody's and Standard & Poor that rate stocks and bonds. So one thing that I tell people is, let's apply that to food and drugs. And some people are convinced. Most people, the biology kicks in and they think, I'm just being hateful because I really want to poison people by saying that a better way to ensure the quality of drugs is to have competition.
Let's address another question that people are often fearful about. In terms of the free market, they tend to if everything goes to private ownership, won't super rich people gobble everything up, and how unfair all that will be? I mean, that's a classic answer. It's a fairly simplistic view, but this fear that the people that already have the wealth will naturally retain it, which is an assumption I don't think is true, and therefore will all be shafted if it was complete free market tomorrow. How do we appease those fears?
Well, there are two ways to get a lot of money. One is you take a gun and you shoot people. We're not talking about that. We're talking about Bill Gates. We're talking about people like that, right? Namely, they got rich through the market. Well, how do they get rich through the market? By enriching everyone else. Bill Gates has, I don't know, 50 billion. I'm not sure what he's got. Say 50 billion. How did he get 50 billion? He got 50 billion by selling people computers for $500, let's say. How much did the people value those computers that they bought for $500? More than 500, otherwise they wouldn't have bought it. Namely, the market is not a zero-sum game. It's a positive-sum game. Yes, Bill Gates gained because it cost him $100 to make a $500 computer, so he made $400 off of it. But you and I bought a computer for $500, and we valued it at $1,500. Those computers have changed our lives. And we made $1,000 profit off the deal. So the way Bill Gates got rich was by enriching people. You see, the way the Marxists think is the way you get rich is by pushing people down. No. The way to get really rich, the way McDonald's, Ray Kroc, who started McDonald's, the way he got rich was by selling people hamburgers at $1 or $2 that cost them 50 cents, and we value the hamburgers at $3. So it's a mistake to think that because they're rich, they'll shaft us. No, because they're rich, they helped us. That is, if they did it honestly through the market. Now, if they were Lucky Luciano or some bank robber, well, then all bets are off. But that's not free enterprise. But free enterprise is you get money, you get rich by buying and selling things.
Okay, so I think the key distinction there is there's the myth of the zero-sum game, which some people might not understand, but it's the idea that there's one cake, and if we cut it all up, and there's lots of us, if there's twice as many of us arrive, we only get half as much each, and if somebody has a big slice, then somebody else has gone without it. And as you were pointing to there, economics just isn't like that, is it? Because every single trade is a profit, and then when you factor in adding value, of course, digging up raw materials and making them into something adding value, that's just generating the profit. It's literally making the money in that value you're creating. So it's the zero-sum game is what people have really got to try and move away from, isn't it? There's no finite amount of wealth that we need to share out.
Julian Simon wrote a magnificent book. I forget what it was called, something like The Brain Will Create Stuff. I forget the title of the book, but the reason we're very rich is because we have free enterprise. Look, are you familiar with the game Monopoly?
Yes, absolutely.
It's a game. That's a zero-sum game. When you land on Boardwalk and you pay $2,000 because there's a hotel there, you're poorer and the guy is richer. But when you go to a hotel and you pay $200 a night or whatever it is, it was a positive-sum game because you value that motel or hotel room more than the $200 and they valued it less. But again, getting back to sociology, you tell people this. You tell people that free enterprise is not a zero-sum game, and they're going to call you a fascist.
Maybe we could just bring environmentalism into it, because obviously the destruction of the planet is high up the agenda, and I personally don't buy into the scary CO2 myth. But that aside, just to address people's general concern about the environment, I know you've spoken about this before, but maybe you can just give us a sort of a nutshell view on how people will naturally say, free market's going to be bad news. The environment's going to get destroyed. How can you be for free market? Look, they're going to just buy it all up and bulldoze over it. So what's the counter argument there? How will the free market serve the environment?
Well, there are many, many areas of environmentalism. We could devote a whole hour to that, but let me just talk about species extinction. I mean, we could talk about global warming. There's a whole bunch of things, forests disappearing, the temperature, the climate change. Let me talk about species extinction, which is a legitimate environmental concern. There is this thing called the tragedy of the commons, which would be similar to the zero-sum game thing. What the tragedy of the commons is, if we own something in common, we don't take care of it. Because why should I preserve it when you'll go grab it? And why should you preserve it when I'll go grab it if we own it in common? Let's consider the cow and the buffalo. The cow was always owned privately. There was never any question about cows going extinct. The buffalo were never able, for many, many years, now happily you can own a buffalo, but for many, many years you couldn't own a buffalo. And buffaloes were owned in common. Look, if you killed your own cow, you paid a high price. Namely, you don't have that cow tomorrow, and you would have had that cow tomorrow if you didn't kill it. So you're going to take care of that cow. Buffalo, you're going to kill it because it's going to be in the next county if you don't kill it, and you'll only use the tongue of the buffalo, and the buffalo is almost extinct. So we have the cow and the buffalo, which biologists might say there's a gigantic difference, but as far as I'm concerned, as an economist, they're the same animal. They're big, they're fat, they're smelly, they have horns, they have a tail. If you crash into one of them, you're in trouble. And yet one was almost extinct and the other was never within 1 million miles of extinction. How do we account for that? Private property rights. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the elephant and the rhino are just big buffalo. The reason we're having trouble with them is because you can't own them. So the solution to the problem of the rhino and the elephant is to privatize them, have private property. Now it's true you can't have 1 acre for an elephant. They need more room, so you have a big farm. In Botswana, which is the country in Africa where the elephant herds are increasing, they have not perfect free enterprise, but they have more free enterprise for elephants and rhinos. In many of the other countries, the herds are shrinking because the poachers get a hold of them, and nobody owns them, and the government can't regulate itself out of a paper bag and all. So that would be just one example. It was the same thing with the alligator. When the alligators were allowed to be private, were held in common, they were disappearing. Now in the United States, you can own alligators, and we have fish farms. So we were thinking we're going to run out of fish. Well, if we have fish farms, see what they do in public lakes and in the ocean, they have, seasons. There's a fishing season. You can only fish for, a couple of weeks or a couple of months. And then they get very sophisticated boats and very sophisticated nets. Look, they don't have any T-shirt seasons. Why don't we have any T-shirt seasons? Because we have private property rights in T-shirts. You have to have it for fish because no one owns the fish. And why shouldn't I grab all the fish? Because if I don't grab all the fish, you'll get some, and the hell with you. I'm the capitalist pig. Whereas if you have fish farms, or if we had privatization of the oceans, which is another book I've written, then we would, look, if you want to solve the environmental problem of species extinction or trees going away or something, have private property rights, which is the aspect of free market environmentalism. I was once in a debate and I was giving this view, and my opponent started laughing. And he wasn't laughing purposefully to undermine me. He was just laughing because he'd never heard this. And he was an environmentalist. He never heard of the idea of free market environmentalism. You think environmentalism is leftism. No, there are Austro-libertarian environmentalists. I'm one. I've written on this. And in our view, we should have private property. That would be the solution to all the problems. So let me try another one. The plastic. Do we have more time? Let's do plastics. Now, in California, which leads us down the socialist path, they're now banning plastic straws and plastic cups and plastic this and plastic that. Look, let's suppose, and why do they do this? Because plastic is non-biodegradable, and you have plastic in the oceans and stuff like that. And plastic gets into the fish and the whales, and it kills them. And why do we have the plastic problem? Assuming that plastics are very, very bad. And paper is good because paper is biodegradable. You stick some paper in the earth and in 10 years it disintegrates and it becomes part of the earth, whereas plastic will last for millions of years or whatever it is. So what would be the free market solution? Well, the free market solution is private property rights. I hate to be like a parrot, Polly want a cracker, but my solution to everything pretty much is private property rights. If we had private property rights, the whole problem would go away. Now look, suppose it costs a penny to produce a plastic bag and a penny to produce a paper bag. Is there any incentive yet for people to eschew the evil plastic and to embrace the paper. No, it's a penny versus a penny. No market forces will lead us in the right direction. The right direction is anti-plastic. I'm stipulating this arguendo. Now, look, I don't know what the situation is in the UK, but in the US, what you do is you pay taxes to put garbage in your garbage bin, and then the sanitation company takes the garbage and puts it in a dump site. What's the problem? The problem is that we have socialization of garbage dump sites. Namely, we have to have demunicipalization, or we have to make dump sites private. The problem is public property. Look, suppose that it costs a penny to make a paper bag and a penny to make a plastic bag, but what's the cost of dumping the paper bag? A penny. Because, paper bags don't do much harm. What's the cost to you? You're a private garbage site owner of dumping a plastic bag? Say it's $5 because plastic is evil. If plastic is evil, then the price of dumping should be very high. So now you're going to charge me to have a plastic bag, a penny to produce it, but $5 to put it away. You're going to charge me $5.01, and if I take the paper bag, it'll be 2 cents. Well, Adam Smith's invisible hand will lead me away from plastic and toward paper. But Adam Smith's invisible hand is not allowed to work because I pay taxes to dump stuff in the municipal garbage dump, and I'll pay it whether I use paper or plastic. So you see, the point is that if what they say is true about plastic, that it's evil, and if you have plastic in your dump sites, you're not going to be able to put buildings over it. You're not going to be able to, after it's full, you're not going to be able to have a farm because it's poisonous. Well, if that's true, then the price of dumping it would be very high. But we don't have any price of dumping it because we don't have any private property. So again, private property, private property, private property.
It's interesting to see how the free market solution, if you like, can apply to these areas where probably people have never thought about applying these ideas. Unfortunately, we've already touched on the fact that these ideas aren't out there in the mainstream, and I'd really advocate that people maybe look into them. On that note, Walter, what would you recommend for further reading, as it were, or some reading, some startup reading? Obviously, Harry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson springs to mind. What else would you recommend?
Well, the two books that converted me to libertarianism were Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand and Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. But I'm a big fan of the Mises Institute in Auburn, Alabama. And if you just Google Mises.org, you will find a cornucopia of readings. And my favorite authors would be Ludwig von Mises and Murray Rothbard. Read the first page of everything that they've got there. And then if you're interested, read more. So I think that there's just a wealth of information, and what you should do is leave your biology at the door. Read that stuff with an open mind. To try to have an open mind, try to overcome your biological roots for hatred of free enterprise. So give these readings a fair chance.
And I like to think that there is a reasoned argument for it. As you said, you can leave your biology at the door and just take your reasoning with you and examine the arguments. There are very, very persuasive, rational, arguments that just stack up in favor of the free market.
I just want to add one more word about the plastic bag. Would we have any plastic bags in free enterprise? Yes, we would still have some, but only if they were worth $5.01 or more. For example, you go to a hospital and they'll put something in your arm and there'll be a plastic bag dripping stuff into you. Those kind of plastic bags we'd still have because those plastic bags would be worth more than $5.01. But the ordinary plastic bags that you wrap your sandwiches in, we'd wrap them in paper. So we're not against plastic. We're only against plastic that's not worth it, because we free enterprise economists have cash registers for heart and dollar signs on our eyeballs. But notice how this will help. See, even the most fervent environmentalist doesn't really want to get rid of all plastic. I mean, you got to have plastic in hospitals. They got to have plastic gloves, right? When the doctors do operations, they need plastic gloves. So we're not against plastic. We're just against the use of plastic, promiscuous use of plastic. So we're very moderate. That's why they call me Walter Moderate Block. I'm sorry I know we're almost out of time, but I had to get this point about plastic in. Plastic gloves and plastic bags for chemicals in hospitals would still be allowed and should be allowed. And I think even the most maniacal left-wing environmentalists, and I have to say left-wing environmentalists, not environmentalists, because there are free market environmentalists, isn't against those kind of plastic. Well, why not? Because of economic considerations.
Thank you so much for putting it so clearly, Dr. Block. And thank you very much for giving us your time.
Thanks for having me on your show.
Really appreciate hearing your perspective. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And do visit the website, lawfulrebel.com. There's lots more there pointing towards economics and Keynesian versus Austrian school. I'll put some links below. And thank you very much for listening. And join us again for another episode of Living Outside the Matrix.
Change you want to see.